We'll do it live.
Do it live, okay? Welcome to I've never read Discworld because I ain't read about half of Discworld. I'm Andy Luke. I live in Northern Ireland and I write stuff.
I'm PJ Hart. I also live in Northern Ireland. I also write stuff. However, I have read the vast majority of Discworld, and therein lies the premise of the show.
Tonight, as you realize, or this morning, we're reading The Last Continent, the Oz themed Rincewind wizard escapade thing. Oh, I should probably say straight up, you might well be listening to this on your favorite podcast provider or one that you're nonchalant about. We also have a video component that goes out over YouTube and Spotify Live, and there may be a few visual elements. There will be a few visual elements with this episode that you might like to go and check out. So, if you want to do a switch over now, that's good. Or if not, we'll yammer away.
We'll wait. Yeah, we can wait. Go switch. We'll still be here. And you're back. Uh, all right. So we kind of lost count, or I certainly have lost count in terms of what book number we're on. Maybe Andy will fill us in with some pertinent details about this particular book before we get stuck into it.
I'm not sure book number. My guess is 22. Publication details, Doubleday, May 1998. All the other listings were for Victor Galan, so I'm not sure what's going on there. My version Z hardback by Josh Kirby. I think one of his last.
98. Yeah, might not be far off.
Problems finding a full bleed of this. I love checking out Josh Kirby's full bleeds, is the wraparound. But this is fairly sort of standard Kirby. We have Rincewind on a kangaroo being chased by emus and bandits and camels and boats and the luggage all on and snakes and crabs and all kinds of chaos and stuff.
Yeah, I think because it's such a brand new environment, it's actually one of my preferred Kirby covers because it's a completely blank canvas for Discworld in some ways. You know, it's this brand new last continent, and it's obviously pulling on some very recognizable real world material. So it's a good pastiche. I think I like. There's a good motion on it. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really feels that compared to maybe some of the other ones, it's not so busy that you can't immediately see what you're supposed to be looking at, which is Rincewind and Scrappy. I guess barreling into each other on the cover. I think that really works in a way that some of the noisier covers, where like every single character is represented and then some, kind of lose me a little bit. You know.
Yeah, there's a nice use of space around it. And it also works quite well with Kirby's sort of want to draw the grotesques, because Australia has that cornucopia of ecology, and that's really well suited to his style.
Hmm. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, you mentioned as well. So this is when the hardback rights transferred from Galans to Doubleday. I think from my recollection, reading Rob's biography, it was just a numbers game, basically. Just the Galans were struggling to keep up with the demand.
Right.
I believe I don't think there was anything kind of more nefarious than that going on. Just Discworld was getting popular, and this is an interesting book for a new publisher to take on potentially. I don't think they would have been worried. I'm sure it still sold a bunch of copies, but they might have perhaps had some concerns for other reasons that I'm sure we'll get into.
If you don't fancy staying with us for the whole hour and a half, TLDR, not favorable. Uh, I'm gonna read the
On the other
inside
hand,
word.
before
And
you do, on the other hand, if you've got a little bit bored of us just completely singing the praises of every single Discworld book that we've read so far, this might be a refreshing change of pace.
and if you were confused by the last continent, don't worry. We are here to be your brothers in that weirdness. We're not promising any answers though.
I could promise zero answers, guaranteed.
This is this world's last continent, a completely separate creation. It's hot, it's dry, very dry. There was this thing once called the wet, which no one now believes in. Practically everything that's not poisonous is venomous, but it's the best bloody place in the world, all right? And it'll die in a few days, except who's this hero striding across the red desert? Champion sheep shearer, horse rider, road warrior, beer drinker, bush ranger, and someone who'll even eat a meat pie floater when he's sober. A man in a hat, whose luggage follows him on little legs, who's about to change history by preventing a swagman stealing a jumbuck by a billabong. Yes, all this place has between itself and windblown doom is Rincewind, the inept wizard who can't even spell a wizard. He's the only hero left. Still, no worries, eh?
I mean, even from the blurb, I've got no idea what's going on.
So I wonder if I had have actually read this blurb prior to reading the book, if I had would have gotten a better understanding of what the hell was going on in this book. I really was confused an awful lot of the time. I went on Reddit, and engaged with a bit of the fan culture with this to try and find out what, if I was kind of alone in my confusion. And I know you had said in the last podcast off air, not one of my favorites, and I kind of just let that be water off a duck's back and just went in with my own, determined to do my own take on it. And I really didn't get it. There's a couple of quotes on Reddit. Somebody wrote borderline incomprehensible.
Did you check? It might have been me. No, I actually didn't. I haven't had as much time to spend on Reddit, unfortunately, as I would like in recent times. But yeah, fair play for going in and checking that out, because it can be quite spoilerific, kind of corner of the fandom. Everything is kind of open for discussion there, but it's certainly anytime I've seen it come up, I mean, it's rarely kind of mentioned in anybody's top 10 or anything like that, and I think I said just before we came on, I'll be curious to know if anybody's even interested in our thoughts on it, because it's not a book that I see discussed a lot by the fandom, positively or negatively, just because I guess, there is so much content as part of the series, and so much of it, in my view at least, is, head and shoulders above this in terms of quality. So I guess maybe it gets a little forgotten about sometimes.
I'm going to quote a comment from N. Haynes, which does a really good job of precognitively summing up my experience, and I'll talk about why that is. He wrote, "This is the only modern book I've read where I was just puzzled the entire time through. It was bizarre. I'd read a passage, Rincewind got to a bar or something, ordered, I think, a beer. The bartender replied, there was a conversation, and I had no clue. The strangest thing was that I knew it was funny. It was like seeing the Matrix. I could see the cue, intro, and punchlines. I could tell there were jokes. I could see their shapes. I knew they were smartly constructed and well written and funny, but I just simply didn't understand any of it. I've never read a book where it's clearly clever and funny to the audience, but I wasn't the audience, and the book was clearly just not for me." Where that hit with me, it was only when researching afterwards that I learned that Rincewind and the Wizards were in two different time periods. I had assumed they were both like way back in the past. That has a lot to do with the early scenes with Rincewind, where he's, in fact, half of the book with Rincewind, where he's just going through the desert on his own. There's nobody else there. And that very much seemed to be the same sort of remote space that the Wizards were inhabiting. So I wasn't attuned to whether there was sort of back and forth where Rincewind might, or the Wizards might take an act to perform something in the past that would affect Rincewind in the future, and that whole back and forward. And I think this might have been somewhere where Terry might have been well advised to discard his no chapters rule and stick markers in the text to make that a bit more plain. But Looking
Yeah, it's a
outside
tricky
the
one.
plot structure into the line depth of the book, it very much felt like a lot of stuff just happens and has no real point to it. And it was very much, it very much put me in mind of the first book, although I think the first book, gets the Color of Magic will always get a pass, I think, because it's the first book, it's setting up the world. Um, and actually, it does have a stronger plot because it leads into the Light Fantastic, where it's all about the Octavo. It sets all that up quite well.
It's also quite episodic in a way, like whereas this isn't. It's like it's one big story that sort of misses, as you point out. So there's kind of less wiggle room in that respect. Whereas if in the Color of Magic or the Light Fantastic, if there's a bit that you don't like, if you don't like the Temple of Og Shoggoth or whatever, then there's some imaginary dragons coming down the line that maybe you
Right.
will like. Whereas this is all very much one conceit.
It's
Although
it's rambling. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, or two conceits maybe if you want to bring the time travel thing into it. But I feel like you were shortchanged there because I know that you're a big time travel story fan, you're a big Doctor Who fan, and everything, and it just kind of yeah, I can totally understand why that because to introduce a completely alien world essentially, to introduce this brand new precinct, like there's no frame of reference for like which what it should look like in the present and what it should look like in the past. So it's very easy for the two to just become conflated because how would we know any different as completely brand new audiences for this content,
That's a
this
really
set.
good point. Yeah, I felt it was a very rambling book. It felt like we have these phrases as writers, pantsers and plotters, and pantsers are just sort of kerouacking and just making it up as they go along. Plotters have a bit more of a semblance, and there's no binary on that. People come and go between it, and I mean, all writing is pantsing at some level, but it felt completely like Terry had no idea what he was going to do next. Didn't have
Yeah,
any of those structural pieces written down in any depth.
yeah. It feels like a bit of a grab bag in the way that the early books were, as you mentioned, where he's got like kind of a bag of tricks that he's interested in, like a bunch of Australian pop culture references and a few kind of vague ideas about creation and creationism, I guess, and that's kind of in the mix too, and a bit of a vague idea about joining them together. But I think you're right. Certainly, the time travel, deciding to set it in two time periods, that felt like a step too far. If you're not going to intricately plot something like that, that's going to get confusing pretty quickly. I think the rest of it you can kind of wing, but if you're going to have two parallel plots in two different time zones and they're meant to interact with each other and they're going to pay off satisfactorily, that needs a bit more than I think what we see here on the page.
In keeping with the podcast's mission statement, can I ask you about your first experience with this novel and how you felt coming back to it?
Yeah, so if you're playing I've never read Discworld Bingo, then mark off me saying I have a very vague recollection of the first time I read this book. That's very, very often the case. But I do have quite a strong sense that this is the book that solidified my I don't like the Rincewind books. Kind of like, and I always sort of had that in the back of my head. And when we started doing the podcast, I had to start thinking about maybe why that was. And I think it's because of this book. I'm not sure exactly how many of them I would have read previously. I have a feeling I might have read this shortly after it came out because it's 1998. So I would have been reading Discworld about this time, or maybe would have just started. Maybe by the time the softback came out, I suppose I might have grabbed it or got it from the library. And I just bounced off it. I got very, very few of the references. Like yourself, I don't think I got the time travel thing the first time around either. I did have an Australian in law at the time without going into any of my family's personal details or personal life. But we did have an Australian in the family at that time. And even with that, like I would say 80% of the references probably went over my head at that stage. I hadn't seen a single Mad Max film at that point. I hadn't seen Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, I probably had the vaguest notion of who Dame Edna Everage was. Like all these references were just complete nothings to me at that time. So, yeah, I would say the kind of the response that you've had to it now, very, very similar to the response I had to it first time around, only with even more confusion into the mix. Me being not very worldly 15-year-old or whatever. And then I guess the only thing that sort of materially changed on the reread for me is that I do now get more of the references. And okay, cool. And I've lived in Australia since then, which probably has helped. But they don't, even with that bit more kind of cultural reference, it still doesn't hang together for me. Like I just said, it still feels like a grab bag. It still feels like it's not as cohesive as any of the City Watch books that we've read so far. It's not as cohesive as any of the Witch books. It definitely feels more just like Terry's kind of kicking back and having fun with Rincewind and not thinking about it too much again, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a big love letter element to Australia. He was doing a lot of touring. He was out in Australia about once a year at least, and had a lot of fondness for the place. So that is something he's trying to put into it. Even though there was this sort of, I didn't get a lot of the references, but been out in Australia too. And we'll talk about our experiences there later in the pod. Um, but there was this whole Australian culture thing from the 70s to the 90s were um, globally just spreading. And I was kind of about for a lot of that, but I just, yeah, a lot of the references just kind of went over my head or just, yeah, didn't land for me. Um,
I mean, it's probably worth saying, like, these weren't necessarily this obscure. Well, I mean, some of them definitely were obscure, but like you touched on there, like Australia was kind of big in global pop culture at the time. You know, The Simpsons had done an episode basically because of that about 2 or 3 years earlier, and they were referencing things like Crocodile Dundee and stuff that was Outback Steakhouse and stuff that was out there, especially in American pop culture, I guess. So it's not like this is just he's indulging this niche interest that he happens to have. Like he did still definitely have his finger on the pulse of kind of global culture, but I think he did just maybe drill down a little bit too far. Some of the references, even now, I'm like that's obscure, that's deep, and it's coming back. You know, Australian pop culture is big again. You know, the biggest kids show in the world is Bluey, which is set in Queensland, and there's even a character I think on the in the last few pages of the book called Bluey in the last continent. So that's come
right.
properly. Yeah, I'll have to dig it out. It's a very passing reference. So yeah, but despite all that, like it's just not the tight plotting I think that we've come to expect from the last kind of half dozen at least books. You know, and that just feels yeah. It makes you want to not necessarily come back to it. I mean, I don't think I would have ever reread this book given the choice if we weren't doing this podcast, you know.
Yeah. I really do want to go ahead and sort of impose a bit of structure with going through the plot synopses, but it's kind of, this isn't Terry's DNA's all over this. You know it's Terry by reading it. It it feels like Terry, but it's very distant. There is a feeling of being shortchanged or bored. In my own experiences, one of the things I noticed in searching people's feedback, Australians love this.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Everybody that wrote identifying as an Australian really, really digged this. There's also the Rat
Yeah,
Chat podcast, our friends Ben and Elizabeth, who are
indeed.
just phenomenal. They're both Australians.
Of
Uh,
course. Gosh,
while
yeah.
recognizing in the shortcomings, they've got a really unique perspective on this book, which is, yeah, will certainly sort of buoy you up. So,
Yeah, of course. I mean, everybody likes to feel seen, and I think to be seen authentically, and regardless of what you have to say about the plot of this book, which I maintain is weak, it does feel like a loving and authentic representation of Australian culture in a way that will make Australians laugh. Yeah, yeah. No, I can totally see that being a very different experience for them for sure.
Cool.
I don't think we're going to spend a huge amount of time on the plot, so we might as well just rattle through the synopses because I think we're not like we're going to be dissecting them. I don't think in any really deep kind of level. Do you want to kick us off?
Part one. The librarian isn't quite himself. Rincewind might be able to help out, but he's finding chicken sandwiches under rocks and being bothered by a kangaroo. The wizards find a window back in time, and Death prepares himself for a holiday.
There's like three other books in there that I want to read. Do you
Right.
know? Like I want to read Death going on holiday again. I guess that sort of happens already, maybe in Mort.
So let's just stick a spike through that. That doesn't really go anywhere at all. It's a
No,
bit of
which
a
is fine. Yeah, I mean,
bit of a letdown. I kind of got my hopes a bit raised. And then Death shows up for his usual couple of cameos, and that's
yeah,
about it.
yeah. I mean that's the kind of the format that's pretty well established for Rincewind books, I guess. If Rincewind's on the cover, yeah, you're gonna get a half dozen Death cameos at the absolute most. So no point getting your hopes up about that. Uh, I would have perhaps also been quite interested in a bit more librarian backstory. It sort of felt like this Wizard's B story was maybe going to be a bit more librarian centric than it ended
Yes,
up being, you know. But I mean, maybe it's best to just maintain that mystery. Some of the gags, some of the, shape shifting gags were quite fun, actually. And it's a spurious enough reason to kind of need Rincewind, but I actually sort of like it that there is one practical use for Rincewind in Unseen University. He's spent 20 plus books being completely useless, if not worse.
right.
Finally, there's something that he knows that the other wizards don't know. I do actually quite like that as a setup. I don't mind that at
I
all.
may have mentioned this before, but it's a fan hope of mine that we do see that Rincewind integrated more into the faculty setup. And it seems like the obvious answer to the Rincewind problem that we see all through this book. And that Rincewind at his worst is he's a cartoon character. You know, he's Roadrunner. He's silly scrapes, and it's my least favorite angle on Rincewind.
Yeah.
We've had some great Rincewind moments. We've had Brick in a Sock. We've had interesting times. I think is a phenomenally good Rincewind story.
Yeah, I think maybe that's part of what kind of irks people about this book is that Rincewind has experienced some character growth over the series, and I mean, it doesn't regress here, but it certainly pauses.
Right.
Yeah, which is possibly one of the list of things that might maybe kind of puts people off. I did not get of all the jokes to this day that I don't get. I still don't really get the finding chicken sandwiches under rocks thing. Is it just a gag about like kind of survivalism or like having to look for like it? Is the gag that you look under a rock for food and you're expecting it to be like worms or beetles or something, and then the punchline is that it's actually a chicken sandwich. Is that the gag? What's the gag?
Okay, so bear with me, listeners. Uh, I would have said if the Rincewind and the Wizards were in on the same sort of thousands of years ago, this is a mark of the god of evolution, like just a chicken sandwich tree, but that's not the case. So then you could say the Unseen University left a chicken sandwich behind a rock or a chicken sandwich tree, but tens of thousands of years it'd be crusty. No, I've no idea. I don't know.
Yeah. And then because yeah, I mean we'll get to this later, I guess, but the confused things for the god of evolution and then the creator of XXXX are two different gods. So like the Aboriginal coded god who's like drawing the pictures and stuff on 4X. Is he like drawing little pictures of chicken sandwiches for Rincewind to find because he needs them to solve? Or is Scrappy, is the kangaroo behind it in some way?
Oh, I
It's,
like that line of thinking. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, as much as any of it makes sense, sure.
Yeah,
You know?
just messing about with gods now.
Yeah, and even that, like the yeah, we'll get into that when we get there.
Yeah, the wizards, the first sort of 25 pages, it deal with the setup of the wizards preparing to travel was, yeah, I quite liked it. It did get my hopes up.
And what about the guy? What about the guy who owns the window? Like, never found him.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
there's no,
never showed
just,
up. Yeah.
just died, just dead, just went through a window and to some island, and I guess got eaten by like a carnivorous cigarette tree or something. I mean, what happened to him? Don't
I
know.
felt the window being there was a bit of a major contrivance. And
Which,
I'm
which would
not
have been
sure it's
fine
even,
had it paid
yeah.
off, but it didn't. You know.
Yeah, why was the window there to that point in time? This is presumably this is something that particular professor has set up, but we have a two loose threads already, and that's yes another problem. This book has a lot of loose threads dangling. Um, the faculty wizards are pretty great whenever. I think this is probably their weakest appearance. Not so much in this first sort of setup, but throughout the book. And I've been thinking about why that is. And you obviously you've got some fantastic ones like Ritcully, Ponder, Wendell Poons, Dear Rest His Soul, all stand out. And
I'm
then the other
pouring one out for
wizards
Wendell.
for Wendell.
I poured one out. Okay, go. Yes,
The
continue.
other wizards are kind of like they're a troop. They're essentially just voices that sort of build on one another. They're a chorus, and I think it's because they're not distinctly marked out in the way that the three names I mentioned are. We've got the Dean lives in fear of Ridcully, but then everybody does. The Bursar's as mad as a box of frogs and drinks eats his dried frog pills. But I mean, so they're kind of defined in relation to Ridcully. And they don't have the big tell is that they don't have names of their own.
Yeah,
Their
I mean
names are the posts
you've
that they
missed
hold.
two out completely, which is telling. You know, the lecturer in recent runes and the chair of indefinite studies, and I completely agree. In this book in particular, it drives me absolutely mad that they don't have names. I can accept the dean and the bursar because at least they're quite relatively well defined. The bursar especially, but yeah, the indefinite chair and the lecture in recent runes. And like you say, in other books, it doesn't really matter because they're just there to like chime in a line every here and there, and it doesn't. They're interchangeable. Who cares? But here, there's like attempts to give them very loose plots, and it makes it really hard to keep track of because I've got no to this day after reading Discworld for 25+ years. Like I don't have a mental picture of what either of those characters look like beyond default wizard. So when you're getting into stuff about like, oh, which one of them fancies Mrs. Whitlow and stuff like that, I just don't care. Like I find it really hard to keep track
Massively
of.
disappointing.
Yeah. So yeah, I think he's leaning on them a bit too much here. They're characters that aren't kind of well enough fleshed out to be lent on to the extent that he's going to go on and try and do the rest of this story, unfortunately.
I'll try and keep you on your toes on that one if I spot anything. I think that's that section pretty much covered.
Oh,
In
the
good
next one's long.
time. We're
Yeah, I told you. I told you. I mean, right, we'll crack on. Part two. Mrs. Whitlow is adequately catered for, and there is an abundant supply of trees growing cigarettes, cheese, biscuits, fruits, pasta, custard, squash, pineapple, plum pudding, and soft-boiled eggs.
Should I
Uh,
stop you there and we'll go into tree time?
uh, uh,
Tree time. Tree time. There is
yeah,
no such
just let me make a note as to where I was.
So this is a tree time gift. Regular listeners will know I've been tracking Terry's use of tree time stuff, trees in books, and there's so many trees all over this. And I did a bit of a survey on weird Australian trees, and there's too many good stuff to read, but I'm going to go through a few, and maybe we'll dot them around later in the book.
I'm going to drink some wine.
So the catalpa tree is a large attractive tree with a broad dome-shaped canopy and large long stalk leaves shaped like hearts or triangles. And the catalpa has other cool names. Trumpet boom,
Trumpet boom.
trumpet boom.
Okay.
Here's a good one. Indian cigar trees, they're known as also, and water sprouts. Whoa.
I like the way it goes from like insane to problematic to boring. Like all your bases are covered there. Like if you're a bit mental, if you're racist, or if you're just like a normal gardener, there's like something for everybody.
I'll put some photos of these on the screen now while we're talking about them. Strangler figs were a really interesting one that grabbed me. So these are forest giants which begin life by growing on other trees. So a bird eats a fig from a mature tree, flies to perch into the fork of another tree, and the seeds left in droppings produce a tiny plant, um, which grows, and the seedling's roots creep down the tree trunk all the way to the ground, wrapping around it as it goes, enveloping the host tree, and the fig becomes a new giant tree, a super tree.
But how are the figs? Are they good? They tasty?
I assume so. That at that sort of size, there's got to be something you can use.
You did say fig, right? I didn't mishear you. Is that what it's called? The
Yeah.
strangling fig? Just makes me hungry. Tell me about boab trees because I did once meet a
Yeah.
boab. I did once meet a boab tree.
The Australian boab, also known as a technical term, Adansonia gregorilli. No, butchered that. Adansonia gregory boab
It
tree.
sounded the same.
So these grow upside down with their branches deep in the earth and their roots reaching into the sky, filled with spongy tissue that takes up water to see it through the dry times. So interesting.
Relevant.
Interesting. I'm sure that relates to our story. So there's a few more, but I want to do one more for this section, and that's addressed to cheese tree, the
Jeez.
Glockhidian Ferdinandi, which is quite common in Australia. Medium-sized woody shrub-like from 26 feet to 98 feet. Disappointingly, they don't grow baby bells, though they get their name from the fruit's visual similarity to cheese wheels.
Hmm.
Small pumpkin-shaped fruit, which are green at first before turning shades of white and pink. These often show up in potpourri. Cheese tree is also known as the water gum, buttonwood, pencil cedar, and jawar.
Yeah, just like who's coming up with these names? But it's the variety of them, like the complete run between just like yeah, picking out some Scrabble tiles and going that's the name of the tree to coming up with something relatively straightforward. I love that. Yeah, must dig out my picture with the boab tree and we'll throw that up. That'll be worth it. That'll be worth it going to YouTube just to see that. I assure you. Right, shall I carry on?
Go for it.
We're not going to say the tree time's over because there's definitely going to be more tree time. But anyway, well, where were we? However, for Ridcully, there's no better chicken taste than the monster you lay on the barbie with your own magic hands. And he's not the sort of man to kill his own grandfather. But how did this ant get across the sea? Who'll tread on this ant? Meanwhile, Scrappy informs Rincewind his presence there has caused something to go wrong. The country is drying up, heading for Bugger Up. He befriends Mad and helps take down a road gang. They arrive at Did You Bring a Beer Along and the bar run by Dongo the Crocodile. Mad has an impressive knife, being as high as a crossbow. I mean, of all the bits, like this is the best bit, right?
I disagree, but I think I meet you at the same point, which is that the Ridcully Ponder stuff is at the heart of this book. Is that
Yeah, I
where you're
mean,
going?
kind of. I guess, yeah. It's sort of. I think it's where both the Rincewind and the Wizard stories reach their relative kind of peaks. Like I like the whole business of the God of Evolution trying to evolve things for that they like. So like things like the cigarette tree and stuff are quite fun and feel very Pratchett. And at the same time, the Mad Max parody is the one that I kind of get the most. I'm like, oh yeah, I get
Yes,
this, and
yeah.
it's kind of informing the plot a bit more than some of the other just Australian parodies where like at least it's getting Rincewind from A to B. you know, it's kind of driving him along a little bit in his own story. And there's some good gags and some good references and stuff there. And also, I just really wish I had my own cigarette tree, obviously.
You've also got the Crocodile Dundee reference that was quite overt and
Yeah.
also quite quick. Um, I've seen other writers say this that Pratchett's trying to squeeze every reference in possible under the
Yes,
sun.
that's fair. I was on the fence a little bit about the place names, as to whether I like them or not, because they're like they're parody names, obviously, but they're also kind of they're parodies of Aboriginal languages, which feels a little bit rum. But then, you know, Terry has obviously given a lot of thought about Aboriginal culture in terms of how he portrays like the art and stuff and the myths and all that. So I mean, it's obviously meant in good fun and like I'd bugger up and did you bring a beer along? Or they're funny names. So I'm like very, very willing to give him a pass on that one because he obviously does have a deep respect for Aboriginal culture, which is on display in other aspects of the book. Did you bring a beer along? This is particularly good one. I'm trying
Uh,
to remember, or maybe you would know because you lived in Perth as well, didn't you? There's a couple of
yeah,
particularly
well,
funny.
I holidayed in Perth, so shall we segue into this?
Might as well. Let's do it.
My aunt Trisha and my cousins Mark and David moved over to Australia, and oh, hello, other cousin Stacey, to Perth in about 1980. And my grandmother decided she was going to take a trip over, and for whatever reason, my grandfather wasn't going over. It was a month out there. I think a month was the sort of the right amount of length to stay. And she took me as the eldest of her grandsons with her. I
Nice.
had to keep, as part of my contract with school, for them letting me take a month off school. I was 9 at the time,
Oh wow.
1982. They made me keep a journal detailing my visit to
Oh,
Australia.
he still got it now. This was worth coming to YouTube for. This is worth seeing.
So it's an odd little thing. I have my like Qantas, which is the Australian Airways, like travel tickets and
Wow.
um, boarding passes and pictures of the airplane and the sun as drawn by a 9-year old. And actually,
It's pretty
so
good.
many things in this that stuff is actually falling out over the floor. Like my junior Qantas flyer flight logs.
Ryanair, don't give you one of those.
Um, Australia had at the time their version of Burger King, which was Hungry Jack's,
Still going,
still going, and I have
I
a
believe.
Hungry Jack's crown.
No way.
There we go. Um, there's also it's a kind of an odd little diary because it starts with very much like what you might imagine a 9-year-old Andrew would, or any 9-year-old would keep, with these sort of eccentric little pickups of like drawings of the mailman, drawings of the house, which is all black,
Oh wow.
all black felt tip, and looks like some sort of horror show, then, which presumably was influenced by just how hot it was. I remember this very visually of just feeling the first few nights there, feeling my back almost on fire as I tried to sleep, and like
Oof,
the
yeah.
touch of the very soft linen just being an extra coating of like flame. Um, but anyway, part of the way through, my grandmother takes over writing this journal, and it gets a lot neater. And here we have a photo of myself and my
Ah,
cousin
no
Mark
way.
with a kangaroo.
Ah, yeah. There you
So
go. There's Scrappy there.
that's a big takeaway. Yeah, I
Keep
was also on television. I was out for
what?
uh, Australia Day 1982, which was Monday, the 1st of February.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it says the temperature was 111 degrees, which was the, at the,
Fahrenheit, one would assume.
eh?
In Fahrenheit, one would assume.
At the
Uh,
time, it was the hottest day ever recorded in Perth. Um,
yeah, it's about what, 40 degrees Celsius, thereabouts.
So we were out playing in the public park and bathing. The TV crews came around and photographed us, filmed us, and that was my first ever appearance on television.
But not your last. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, Australia Day is definitely one of those kind of weird, kind of cultural things I didn't sit quite right with me when I was out there. Or no, well,
Do you want to give us a,
no,
a setup on
no, not
what
really.
you
I don't want to be too down. I did my working holiday thing in my 20s, as many people do in Australia. I lived in Perth as well for about 7 or 8 months. And I'm just looking at the map now, just thinking about some of those funny names that Terry has. I mean, Perth has Carrinyap, Mullaloo, Ballajura, just literally just picking names at random off the map here. Kalamunda, so all these like
Oh, I think
Bur
I'm pretty sure it's Alabama.
Burragoon, have to get that one in there as well. Um, Nedlands, if you're an Australian, there's an actual place in Perth called Nedlands. Ned is like Australian for spied or chav. Um, yeah, so
I've got some Yanchep here,
oh yeah,
like some Yanchep National
uh,
Park.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if we actually made it there or not. We went to a few of the other ones up north.
More Yanchep. Well,
Oh, it's the place to
you
be.
talk away and I'll throw stuff up. For,
And so when I was there, I worked in a British theme pub. Like when Irish people go around the world, they tend to work in Irish pubs. I couldn't find a job in an Irish pub, so I ended up working in a British pub, and it was super kind of yeah weird. It was like right down in the central business district and part of this relatively upmarket hotel chain, and attracted a very very strange clientele from like business people during the day to occasionally white supremacists at the weekend because it was a British theme pub and it had a Union Jack hanging out the front that attracted people who were fetishized that sort of thing a little bit occasionally, and I nearly got fired for refusing to serve some white supremacists. So yeah, good times. I've got kind of mixed feelings about Perth, but like we had a blast there. We also experienced some extremely hot weather. I think we arrived also in their summer just before Christmas 2010, and it was 40 degrees easily, I think, the day after we got off the plane. So yeah, mixed feelings about the place. We took a road trip from there right up the west coast to Broome, which is like 3,500 kilometers, something like that. And it's like proper, it's like this Mad Max bit of the book that we're talking about. There's some real middle of nowhere, proper bush kind of landscape up there. So that was cool. Like that's kind of my favorite kind of memories of Western Australia is kind of the wilderness. Like the makes it feel like proper Rincewind's version of Australia. One thing we should potentially just mention is Mrs. Whitlow, I suppose.
yes, yes. Pin-up girl of the Wizards, although not not literally.
I mean, even at that, I'm like, the Wizards go on holiday, or the Wizards get stranded back in time with their housekeeper is like, it's kind of a funny setup, but
Right.
is it enough to sustain a whole like sea story? Because it basically got a thing, especially through this section, there's like a whole running thing about trying to kind of spoof to her that everything's fine and that it's all
Yeah,
under control, which I don't mind, but like it's not the focus of it, and then like it feels sort of starts to feel shoehorned in a little bit, and then it sort of feels like he's running out of steam on that, and decides that's when he decides to make whichever of the wizards fancy her. That's when they decide, oh yeah, I guess maybe the lecturer in recent runes can fancy her. That'll keep this going a bit longer, you know.
yeah, and the revelation that everything has gone a bit caca is held off to the latter half of the book, and I think this is a case of Terry trying to do too much. I
Yeah.
think there was a lot that could have been mined from um, keeping Mrs. Whitlow in the dark, but he's also mining the Mrs. Whitlow story in regards affections,
Hmm.
mining the story of that group trying to figure out where they are, where Rincewind is, what's going on. yeah, it's just something that sort of sinks because there's too much really that Terry's trying to achieve.
Yeah, and regardless of the results, I'll always kind of respect that. Like these books, for better or for worse, 9 times out of 10, it's for better. They're full of so many big ideas, and sometimes just whatever alchemy is at play between those ideas. 9 times out of 10, it works. This time, it's kind of creaky.
This is kind of the section where I had lost patience with the Rincewind stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I
If,
just
if if not for the Mad Max gags, I think I would have been with you. That kept me on board at least through the end of this, because like I've got a soft spot for Mad Max and all things post-apocalyptic.
yeah, despite sort of I wouldn't be such a big fan of the Mad Max films, but I would have I got those references, the Crocodile stuff, Dundee stuff, but again, it was that sort of experience of feeling quite remote from the book, feeling quite removed as you know. Uh, the whole sort of yes, it's clever, yes, it's funny, but I'm not feeling it. So I don't know. Um, Thankfully, the next section really did float my boat. It's my favorite part of the book. The wizards find a boat and Ponder finds a god, but the wizards find the same god. Rincewind awakens with a terrible hangover and a promise to speed shear sheep. He receives directions from some overly generous horse rustlers, and Mrs. Whitlow explains sex. So the whole scene with Ponder and the god of evolution and him just being shown the keys to the universe and yipping about like a fanboy, and then the wizards enter and they push every single button and then ask what it does, like kids in a fairground. It's such a wonderful description. It's a long scene that goes on for 10 or 12 pages, and every moment of it is just gold. And it made me giddy just reading it. I can see why Ponder is such a fan favorite. And we've had, to be fair, we had a bit of this in the segment building up where you see how Ponder feels towards the other wizards,
Uh,
that they're just constantly undermining him, ignoring him. He's clearly the most talented and intelligent man there, but he sort of is sort of put in this little box in the corner of the room, and now, like, this is his sort of research students' paradise, and they come in and like crap all over it. And you have this incredibly high concept stuff as well of, you know, an elephant being built by a god, which is a reference to the artist Damien Hirst and his formaldehyde animal cuttings, which
yeah,
were very big in the
I was
1990s.
gonna say that would have been pretty hot stuff when this book was being written for sure. Yeah, it is. It's a good sequence, and like you said, it sort of reflects well the dynamic between the wizards when it does work, which is usually, let's say, Ponder, but sometimes Rincewind is doing something, and then Ridgely in particular will come and mess it up, and then the other wizards will sort of be there in support of that to kind of cause further complications or to chime in as a chorus. And that dynamic is sort of back on display here because you're not having to lean on the supporting wizards too much. It's very much Ponder wants to unlock the mysteries of the universe, and Ridgely wants to poke around inside an elephant to see how it works,
Yeah.
and misconstrues, misunderstands everything that he's told, and they get all these kind of funny plays on words, and the other wizards get to chime in, and that's a really well established dynamic, and yeah, it works great. And the big idea that the god of evolution doesn't know what sex is pretty funny, I guess. Like I don't know how I would have felt about this the first time I read it. Probably try. Yeah, I think it might have been a bit of a bit too esoteric a concept for me to fully grasp. But like the payoff of that Mrs. Whitlow is the one who has to kind of step up to the plate, as it were, and deliver the talk. I think that is a good payoff. And this does feel like, as you say, I suppose maybe the best sort of self-contained little story arc within.
I know we don't usually do quotes in the middle of the show, but I sent a screen cap of a page to my brother, which I loved. I'm just going to read it out here. Ponder rolled his eyes. These things always sounded fine when he worked them out in his head. He'd read some of the old books and sit and think for ages, and a little theory would put itself together in his head in a row of little shiny blocks. And then when he'd let it out, it'd run straight into the faculty. And one of them would always ask some bloody stupid question, which he couldn't quite answer at the moment. How could you ever make any progress against minds like that? If some god somewhere had said, let there be light, they'd be the ones to say things like, why? The darkness has always been good enough for us.
Yeah, I thought unlocks a lot of different feelings from like what it's like to be a researcher at a university, but also I think there's like a little bit of the kind of cultural default of people specifically from Northern Ireland, and that where it's always just like, oh yeah, why do you need to turn on the light? Sure, what's wrong with the darkness? There's something a little bit, people of a certain age from a certain place, i.e. here, just get on like that, don't they? That's a very recognizable personality trait specific to Northern Ireland, I think.
Yeah, that sort of old dogma that informs sort of, yeah, what has evolution ever done for us, sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. There, I don't have it to hand, and it would break the format of the podcast if I sorted out. But if you've ever get a chance to read Milkman by Anna Burns, she's a Booker Prize winning book about Northern Ireland, and she has a really, really great paragraph in that just sums up that attitude as specific to people from here, about adult students in a French class who refuse to acknowledge that there's more colors in the sky than blue. They basically refuse to acknowledge the colors of a sunset because they won't admit to themselves that there's that level of beauty in the world, because what if it gets taken away? And it's like really, really ludicrous, surreal kind of scene, but like genuinely quite troubling and heartbreaking at the same time. Um,
I think
it's not.
I'll get a link to that in the description. I might check it out myself.
It's a tremendous, tremendous book. Absolutely no relation at all. About as far from a Discworld book as you could possibly read. But yeah, but genuinely brilliant.
We've got
Or what else? What else have you got?
Rincewind speech shearing sheep. The scene we've had with Ponder and Stibbons, it's like a jolt in the arm, and suddenly reading the next section of the book, it just feels more exciting, more refreshing, and it sort of instills confidence. And so, therefore, I didn't feel Rincewind speech shearing sheep. I thought I was going to trick you into reading that out.
Tough.
It doesn't feel like a bad scene. It feels relatively enjoyable.
Yeah, it almost sort of feels like,
Tense.
well, no, I don't know, but like at least we're on pretty familiar kind of territory here where Rincewind gets shit faced and then says he can do something that he can't do, and then proceeds to do it anyway through, various coincidences and happenstance, which are all driven by Scrappy the kangaroo. And like, yeah, again, similar to the island stuff, it's quite a funny standalone kind of little sequence, but like how it's driving the overall
Yeah, there's
plot
always
is
been this
anybody's
Deus
guess.
Ex Machina thing around with Rincewind. It's usually the gods of fate are playing some sort of card game, and he's
Or the
it's
luggage will just eat
push in the
somebody.
right direction. And
Yeah. I guess, you're taking off your Australia bingo card, you got to get the sheep shearers in there, and the rustlers, yeah, horse rustlers, sheep rustlers, all that kind of stuff. I think it's around here. I could be wrong, or maybe it's coming up soon where we start to get mentions of like the outlaws, like the famous outlaws, which are all basically just Ned Kelly references as far as I can tell. But I think we start to get references to them here, and Rincewind's obviously gonna, through no fault of his own, step into that role pretty soon.
do you want to read out
Yeah,
the synopsis?
yeah. And on that note, part four. Following experiments with soup broth, Rincewind is mistaken for a sheep rustler and jailed, pending a hanging. He makes an escape with the aid of Fergo Dibbler, reaches the kitchens of the Opera House, inventing the Peach Nelly. On the streets, he hides in a carnival float where he and the women are defended by the fast-moving luggage. Meanwhile, Ponder finds his apprenticeship is not to his liking and rejoins the faculty. Their competition over Mrs. Whitlow and general paranoia reaches its peak during a magical storm, sending them overboard into shark-infested waters. The waves take them to land. Surf's up for the bursar. Yeah. So, just for I've never read Discworld bingo players, there's a lot going on in that bit.
Rincewind ending up in jail. What are the chances?
Yeah, good to see a dibbler though.
Yes,
That
yes.
was inevitable, but welcome for sure.
And there's for those who've read the Elspace entry annotations or listened to Prat Chat podcast, there's been a lot of parallels drawn between Dibbler and a right-wing Australian politician, both racists who worked in the fast food industry. So there you go.
Interesting.
But she's very old now. She's like 71 and she'll die soon.
Poor Dibbler. Feels like Dibbler's the one getting besmirched in that kind of comparison.
Yeah, it is nice to see Dibbler racism and all sort of return and a familiar face in this weird wasteland.
Indeed. And so we had sort of the example of like the Mad Max stuff. I was like, yep, that's kind of fine. It's getting Rincewind across the outback. It's getting him from point A to point B. It's a reference that I get. It's one that I like. So that's fine. The opposite of that for me is probably like this whole opera house kitchen inventing the Peach Nelly thing. I get that it's based on, I guess, something that actually happened. Is this, what is it, is it Pavlova or what's the... Sorry, I'm thinking about the kitchen of the opera house, where he goes and invents the Peach
Oh
Nelly,
yeah,
which is a reference to Peach Melba, I guess.
Nelly Butts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but we didn't even the Pride Parade thing.
I don't know where that typically comes from, the kitchen, apart from it being Peach Melba.
Yeah, but and I think that's it. But it's like it's just drawn out massively. Like it gets like so many hits, and it keeps coming back. The poor guys at Charlie or whatever the cook keeps coming back, and it's like, yeah, this is all in service of a gag about Peach Melba, I guess. I'm trying to just make sure that I'm not getting too far ahead of myself because I think that the story structure is all over the place in this. So Rincewind's hooking up with the drag queens in this bit, right? On the streets he hides in the carnival float. So yeah, so he's with the drag queens and the luggage is making his reappearance and stuff
Okay,
as well.
I've got a few answers for you. Rincewind has invented the Peach Melba, the ice cream desert named in our world for Dame Nellie Melba, the
Yes.
famous Australian soprano. There we go. And we've got Rincewind now stumbling into the world famous Sydney gay and lesbian Mardi Gras.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's cool. That's totally fine, and it's been set up because it's sort of just about works for me because we do get that very short snippet at the start of the luggage kind of hooking up with this traveling gang of drag queens, and they're eventually going to come back here. But like I'm really allergic to like characters who have like an actual impact on the story being introduced after the midpoint. And I know it's like super prescriptive plot structure stuff, but to have like Neelette come into it here and
Right.
like kind of become quite important and become sort of like a sidekick for Rincewind, that feels like super late, like way, way too late.
The reference I was trying to pinpoint was the film The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Oh yeah,
In
yeah.
very much the same way that this is like a sort of a really bad. It doesn't follow the Chekhov's gun rule at all. I mean, these characters are quite vital to the story's conclusion, seemingly, or at least this plot thread of it, and they just appear in almost the final fifth.
Yeah. As I say, there's a
Bit of disappointment.
very oblique reference to them at the start when we first see the luggage, but it's too oblique. It's not. We need more. Yeah, like you say, like we need to kind of know a bit more about these characters, and we need to see them at least two more times, I would say, in the intervening period for them to justify their importance, the level of importance that they have in the conclusion. But there's just too much going on. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, again, I think these are all kind of weaknesses in the story that have been pointed out by others for sure. One thing that I do like in this section, and was the Berkshire surfing. It's like, by this point in the story, like everybody knows what's going on. We're all mentally ticking off like a list of Australian kind of cultural stereotypes in our head, and we're like, oh, nobody's gone surfing yet. I wonder who it's going to be. And then it's the Berkshire. I thought that was quite fun.
Yeah, yeah. Just thinking back to you had in the opening credits of Home and Away, which was introduced as the edgier neighbors,
Indeed,
and you had
loved
your
it.
characters surfing because they lived in was it Summer Bay, which was
That's
a
right. Good
popular surf
knowledge.
spot, and so
I
certainly
like the way you're talking about it like it's real. It's not real. It's like,
the earlier episodes had more of a focus on the surfing culture and sort of being by the seafront kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. I wanted to. You can see I'm trying to shoehorn in talk about Australian culture because I did want to sort of go on about the stuff that's not in the book. And like Neighbours and Home and Away were massive zeitgeist things at the start of the 90s
yeah.
that I was luckily enough there for. And you had Jason Donovan and Kylie Minogue and a lot of other big name stars, Natalie and Bruglia, all kind of spinning out of that. And that sort of, everybody's having Barbies all the time and drinking grog and struth and no worries, and that infusion of Australian language into certainly into British culture
Yeah.
because it was a massive pop phenomenon. It was the Game of Thrones of its day, you know.
I don't know who comes out of that looking better, Game of Thrones or Home and Away. But yes, no, you're totally right. It was everywhere at the time. Home and Away in particular was a favorite of mine as a kid. It was the one that was big in our house. My wife, she was a neighbour's family. Somehow we still managed to make it work, you know. Um, but
Very,
yeah,
very good storytelling. Very sort of those plots that were very infectious for the enthusiasm. I mean, let's not get all sort of highfalutin literature snobbish about this. You know, soap opera, when it's done well, is just as capable of story as any other form of literature, and it's the same argument that early Pratchett was faced with as
yeah,
being,
absolutely.
fantasy, that you can't do interesting stuff with orcs and dwarves. Of course you can.
Um,
You do fantastic stuff with it.
my first TV writing job was writing like C&D storylines for Irish language soap opera
Oh,
called Shacked, BBC Northern Ireland and
right.
TG Cahir. Yeah, there you go. See,
Oh,
you'll find it's just in the kind of just about sort of pre YouTube ubiquity. So there's like snippets of it out there, but there's not a lot of it. I wouldn't waste any time going and seeking it out. But it was a formative experience for me. A job I really really enjoyed. I really
yeah,
loved
I
it
would
actually.
love to have a go writing soap. And soap has, perhaps because it's always been in that sort of ghetto that the comic book and sci-fi fantasy type concepts existed in long ago, that it feels kind of a bit more disposable. So you have a bit more freedom to be more inventive, to prove. You've a lot more to prove with it, what you can do, which is, or if you want to, which can open the doors to sort of ambition performing itself.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, I think like the comic book comparison one's an interesting one because you're sort of freed slightly from the importance of storytelling. You know, if you've got your good characters, which also Home and Away and Neighbours included, especially in those days, had really good big characters, and then same as comic book, all you had to do was throw them at each other, and loads of fun stuff would happen. It was great. That's one thing we maybe didn't have enough of in the soaps that I worked on in NI. And Shocked had some good big characters. And the English language follow up that I also worked on, 6 Degrees, maybe could have been a bit bigger. Although we did have Michelle from Dairy Girls in it. She was a good big character, but we that's obviously not the same character. It's not a shared universe or anything. I'm just blanking.
Oh,
I
love
know
Michelle.
I'm just blanking on the actor's real name. Uh, but yeah, it could have been a bit bolder, I think, in those terms. But it was at that time period where things were a little bit grittier and a little bit darker. But I don't think soap should ever really be that. You know.
Something else that was also going through my head, especially in the earlier stages of reading this book, is Farscape. Now, Farscape obviously, well, came out a couple of years after this started, but Farscape is a wonderfully, uh, I mean, it's a science fiction show that is very Australian. So it's filmed in Australia, uses mostly Australian cast and characters, but it also embodies a really Australian sensibility. It has a hard edge to it. It has a weirdness to it, a incredible weirdness, embodied obviously through the Jim Henson puppetry workshop, but also that kind of infects in like in story and things that happen. Like you have the ship that they live aboard is alive. They're wonderful for exercising sci-fi tropes. So you have the sort of the transporter duplicate story,
Hmm.
but rather than have this all resolved in one episode, you have two copies of this character running about for 6 or 7 episodes.
Oh wow, that would have been rare back then too. Like yeah,
And the
wow.
basic story of Farscape is that
I really, really like talking about Farscape.
there's a NASA astronaut who ends up in a weird alien universe where aliens are commonplace.
Yeah, I think that's about the extent of my knowledge of it. Anything after that is new for me.
For that, it's kind of got parallels with Rincewind, although I think John Crichton is Rincewind done right, and there's the other characters all sort of it, it's it's about how he tries to relate American and Earth culture to them as a way of to them to try and sort of rationalize why they should be doing things a certain way, but also to keep himself sane.
Yeah,
And their reactions to him, and they, although they're all aliens, they have a shared universal culture, and he's just the weird one, and it's
yeah,
really fun dynamic. So, if there's, I think it's the closest Discworld equivalent that we see in the sci-fi sort of genre on TV, and it's certainly it does TV sci-fi like nobody else has ever done. I mean, this was an era where everybody was trying to challenge the Star Trek.
yeah.
So you had things like Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica, Firefly, but I think nobody has ever quite done it like Farscape. So,
Yeah,
big recommendation.
out of all the shows mentioned there, Farscape's the only one I haven't seen. So yeah, should go back and check it out. Yeah, just when you're saying about that sort of Australian sensibility, like I think Terry tries to touch on it a couple of times here, and just in terms of their idea of like that kind of ingrained Australian thing about kind of having a fair go, I guess, and Dibbler's called Fair Go Dibbler, and that kind of comes out in the plot through this idea of Rincewind being allowed to escape. Like if he has a good last stand, or if he makes a kind of a good go at an escape, they'll write a song about it and they'll let him go because fair play kind of thing. And a bit like the Peach Melba thing, it's just stretched a little bit too far for me. We've seen kind of Rincewind's elaborate escapes in previous books. Like we know what's coming. I don't think the kind of Australia Ned Kelly angle really adds enough of a difference to it to make it feel in any way fresh or new. And then that's exacerbated by the fact that it just goes on for way too long,
Yeah.
I
The
think.
problem, the problem with this book, and the problem with talking about this book, is that the joy is in the little details for the most part. The story's pants, but it's the little things. It's the fair go dibbler. It's the moment where the mantra of no worries starts to become quite funny. Actually, I think it's sort of yeah, okay, that's funny. Now it's annoying. Now it's funny again.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where Terry's love for Australia is obviously coming through.
Oh yeah, I mean it's totally genuine for sure.
And
Yeah.
it's quite infectious. I mean, we were talking about this, and the no worries joke came up quite a bit in our direct messaging. So
Indeed, yeah. It made me realize that I said too much as it is, and I think that's probably more a hangover from watching too much Australian soap opera in the 90s than it is actually having lived in Australia. Like I don't think that's where I picked it up. Uh, yeah, so no worries, I guess.
a few things with the wizards. Ponder finds
Oh
a
yeah.
leadership not to his liking, and I think that's supposed to be because the god of evolution had invented the beetle to be taken over from mankind or to be more powerful than the monkeys. But when I was reading it, I didn't really feel that. I just felt like Ponder kind of just quits, and it's not really explained why.
Yeah, I think that's that. I think your explanation is was my reading of it as well. That this guy, yeah, was going to create a master race of beetles essentially because he loved beetles, and Ponder was like, oh right, maybe that's not such a good idea. But again, I could be totally wrong. There might be other interpretations of that out there. There's definitely like some really big plot stuff in this book that I just do not get. That could very easily be one of those things.
And we have the magicians getting sort of quite competitive over Mrs. Wetlow and sinking the boat in a magical storm. And I think it's supposed to be that the magical storm is exacerbating their factionalism, or whatever traces with it, but it's not, again, it's not really explained. It's a loose thread to me.
Yeah, it's quite loose. I mean, I think it's more that it clashes with some other stuff that's going on because yeah, they're wizards, and if there's like raw magic around, that makes them more powerful. And when they get more powerful, they get a bit crazier because they're wizards. But then that clashes with the other kind of thing that's going on, the time travel thing, where they're also their internal timey-wimey whatever is going off, and they're all changing ages and stuff at the same time. So it all gets very confusing very fast.
Oh, very much. The wizards de-age in a morphic field and join an old man at a fire to offer painting lessons. Rincewind and Neilette travel to Bugger Up University. Combining Dibbler's meat pies and cans of funnel web, Rincewind defines a faculty and brings them back through time and finds a way to make it rain.
Boom, done. Yeah, so that's whatever timey-wimey stuff we were just chatting about. And then, yeah, so one of the things that kind of winds me up a little bit about this is like, it's so clearly intentional, but it just doesn't work for me, is that the wizards do exactly the same thing with the creator of FourEcks, the guy painting, that they do with the god of evolution. But it's just, but there's no like progression. There's no story progression in it. They just do literally the exact same thing. They mess everything up with the God of Evolution and then leave, and then arrive on FourEcks and mess everything up for the creator on FourEcks as well, with no kind of like no lesson learned, no character growth, no
Yeah.
plot progression really. It's just the same gag essentially twice with a different god. Feels a bit unlucky for these gods, but like
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm always kind of willing to place more trust in the wizards' stories and the Rincewind stories. But there's kind of a thing with Pratchett books that aren't so great, that you kind of feel at this point that things generally do accelerate and begin to sort of throw up hints at how things are going to resolve, or to prepare to tell that. And it doesn't really happen with this book. There's no sort of acceleration, and right to the very sort of like last sort of 10 pages, I was kind of wondering when it was going to happen, when it was going to explain to me,
yeah,
what was going on. And
I,
yeah, I
I know what you
really
mean.
was found wanting. I mean, it's very, to come back to what you originally said, it is very in character to have the wizards going and patronizing this old man who's painting these paintings that come to life. And
I just
it
trying to
doesn't
figure out,
really advance the story, does it, though?
is the point because they don't realize he's a god. They just think they don't realize that he's creating this continent. They just think he's some dude painted on a rock. But is the point that they would do this regardless? Like they just did it to a god that they knew was a god, so that they're almost like kind of equal opportunities condescenders. They'll like they'll condescend to anybody regardless. But again, it doesn't really drive the story. I think that escalation that you're looking for there, I think he does make an attempt, but it just gets kind of lost in all the loose threads. I think the fact that the water has run out, like the water has completely gone by this point. Like from the start of the book, the water is running out.
Yes.
And by the time we get here, it's dry, it's gone.
So
And
this
that,
is actually this is a main plot point all the
yeah,
way through the book, but it's not really clear until this last section.
yeah. So the
Um,
fact that that has now completely run out, that's meant to be the kind of final escalation. But I completely agree that it's just totally buried in a lot of loose threads,
and
basically.
I can't quite understand how the big how the water returns and how the wizards are pulled through time. I actually, when I was writing these synopses, I had to go back and forward through the book. I had to go and read wiki synopses, and I'm really not even sure I got it right.
Yeah, I mean,
So are you any brighter on this?
my understanding, loose understanding, is that the wizards lose the creator's spinny thing, the bill roarer thing. It's like a spinny musical instrument type yoke, and that's what's supposed to make it rain. But they lose it, so then there's no rain, and then Rincewind finds it buried underneath the university or whatever, and then he does make it rain, and that makes the rain come back. Uh,
There's a
but
whole anti-Chekhov's gun with this as well. I think it is mentioned at the start of Bill Roar, but it's nowhere. Um, yeah, it's
yeah, I
left
mean, the
alone.
wizard though the wizards don't lose it until they arrive on 4X, obviously. So that's basically in this final section. It's in the last act. So yeah, it's something. Well, I mean, the mystery of the water, why the water is gone, why the rain's gone. Like as you say, that's the mystery that we're essentially presented with at the start. But yeah, we don't get any clues to solving it until now. That's way, way too late. And then the final resolution of that comes way, way too close. So yeah, like you say, and also like a bill roar, like I had to look it up. Like it's quite an obscure thing, like MacGuffin to hang a mystery around. Like I have difficulty picturing it in my head, like how it works, what it sounds like, all that kind of stuff. Just makes it harder to buy into that stuff, I guess. What I did buy into though, because it really made me want to join in, was the fact that in order to finish this story, Rincewind just gets absolutely shit faced. I'm like, I'm with you, man. Like that's how I'm feeling. Let's do it.
This was the big confusion point with the beer and the meat pies. What does that actually accomplish? What is going on there? Is it helping
So
him think outside the box, or is it?
yeah, I think the gag is just that in order to be in the right frame of mind to save the day, Rincewind has to be smashed. And I hesitate to make this connection. But is he kind of saying that like to be in tune with 4X, you have to be drunk because Australians are all drunk or whatever? And like that's a cultural stereotype, but it's one that they kind of embrace. It's all in good fun or whatever. So,
There
and the
is a
same go.
really nice quote in there somewhere about that sort of coming home from the pub type cooking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the meat pies. You didn't have any meat pies when you were in Australia?
Uh, I'm sure I did. I can't remember that long time ago,
Yeah, I definitely.
43 years ago.
There you go, man. Jeez, yeah. The kebabs and sushi rolls were definitely bigger when I was there, but you could still get a meat pie, especially out of the city. I'm not so sure about the green gravy or the mushy peas, but yeah, that whole bit. And right, this is where I really started to think that like I've just missed something. Like I've completely like just not read something right, and it's completely means that I've misunderstood this whole book because I just don't understand why the Arch Chancellor of Bugger Up University is also called Rincewind.
Well, it's implied that he actually is Rincewind, a different, like a different Rincewind member of the family, because there's that scene where Red Cully is looking over at him, and he's
There's
confused
similarities.
for a moment. Yeah,
So it's just that kind of UK Australian thing where like lots of people's ancestors immigrated to Australia. That's it. That's the extent of the okay. Because maybe I was looking for some more, some timey-wimey stuff, for some magical stuff that just wasn't there.
yeah. I think that was initially my first reading. Obviously it's my least favorite Discworld book, but I'm not ruling out going back to it, because now that I have a better understanding of the structure there is of it, I think you will definitely bring a new illumination to the reading of it. I think this has been quite therapeutic, bringing it out in the open and dissecting it and trying to figure this book out.
Yeah, it just like there's a lot counting against it for me going in, where it's got a lot of stuff in it that I know that I'm not going to like. First of all, Rincewind, not my favorite Discworld protagonist. Secondly, it's the most loosely structured plot wise of any of the books, possibly full stop, but certainly of any of the books since The Light Fantastic. And then thirdly, I just sort of feel that like the kind of gags about Australia thing makes it sort of feel a bit dated, like, and I know it is coming from a place of love and respect for Terry, but like that kind of Crocodile Dundee, the Simpsons are doing it. Everybody's got their kind of Australia gags or Australia episodes in the late 90s or whatever. Just makes it feel very of that time, makes it feel a little bit dated as well, I think.
I would really actually be interested in checking out the one of the audio versions of this.
Yeah, I
Um,
wonder who reads it.
yeah, it could be quite interesting. Oh, a Tony Robinson edition.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about these new ones, these new all singing, all dancing ones. I wonder have they got this far yet? Oh no, Colin Morgan? No.
Uh,
Or Colin Morgan.
names
Is that
familiar
am
too.
I thinking of from like Merlin and stuff? Is that the same guy? He's from here? Yeah. No, that he's actually a good shout for Rincewind. That is a good show. He was Merlin in like the BBC Merlin show from like whenever that was.
No, 2008 to 2012.
Yeah, there you go.
Billy Clampton and Kenneth Branagh's Belfast.
That's right. He's in Belfast. He's one of the baddies in Belfast. He was in Channel 4's Humans. He was good in that actually. I've got a lot of time for him. Actually, I like him a lot. I think it would be a really good Rincewind. All of a sudden, I'm like slightly interested in possibly listening to that. He's from Armagh. He's 6 months, 5 months older than me. There you go. Now we're just stalking Colin Morgan. This was. Hopefully, he's not listening to this. Yeah, interesting. Wow, I didn't realize he was doing these. That's class. Because I haven't listened to any of the Rincewind ones for obvious reasons. Wow, yeah, that's made me rethink that slightly. I've just given up my Audible subscription as well, which is a shame. All right, cool. So if you're interested in doing a reread or a re-listen to this, we recommend our good pal Colin Morgan in the new Audible Discworld editions. So any final thoughts? Any kind of last little
Yeah, a couple
ruminations?
actually. I'm guessing you were probably reading the ebook copy.
I did read the ebook version, and that is fine. Everything about that is fine. I am getting a bit sick of it, actually. Especially, I'm now reading off a much smaller screen than I used to. I'm reading off my daughter's Kindle Fire tablet, and it's a pain. I'm really starting to miss the hard copies, and I miss the audiobooks a little bit. So yeah, I'm gonna need a new strategy, I think, for listening going forward. But stay tuned for that. I'm sure
And this is
everybody's
the
on
way
it.
to go. I thought we'd just wrap up with another tree time feature.
Absolutely.
After it's been like 15 episodes since I've been able to do tree time.
You've earned a double dip for sure.
There's a street tree in Sydney. Do you know what it grows out of?
The street.
A pothole in the street.
Uh,
One of my favorites is Angaphora costata. So until I get the photos up, you're going to have to stick with me, PJ. As it gets older, its base spreads as a massive tree. There's a blogger, Mark David, has photos of one spreading over a surrounding rock, giving the impression the tree was melting and oozing down the cliff. And to add to this, inside its sap is blood red, like
Gee, that's horrific. Yeah, it's very Australian by the sounds of it, in terms of like, yeah, that killer wildlife. Even the trees are filled with blood. Love it.
You've also got waddy woods, a grows wood which is quite hard and quite dense. Aborigines would use it to make waddies, heavy wooden clubs. Its pods can be papery with large flat seeds. Could use them for exercise books. Speculated it's been widespread across central Australia during wetter climates 400,000 years ago. Protective habitats for birds of all sizes, though not at the same time. You've also got the mulga, cylindrical spikes. Aborigines referred to these as umuna, which means long life. They are, however, allergic to fire.
I mean, isn't everything?
And then final one worth mentioning is the brigalow, which is generally good for resprouting after fires. A small to medium-sized acacia tree yielding a dense, moderately fine-grained hardwood, also known as spearwood or orchor. It forms extensive open forest communities on clay soils, such as the brigalow belt. And this is a wide band that runs between Queensland and New South Wales along Australia's eastern coast. It's like a tropical savanna. It covers 157,623 square miles. It's home to the unadorned rock wallaby and the black striped wallaby, which lives in the areas of vine thicket, along with a wingless dung beetle. Lots of bats, koalas, wallabies, birds, and the Fitzroy River turtle, which can breathe through its bum.
So. That is not where I thought that was going. But I mean, if ever there was a place to leave it, unfortunately we can't leave it there. We should, but we can't.
I want to give a special thanks to Andrew Wood. So Andrew Wood is my new apprentice on work experience, and he's going to be helping out with a bit of the editing on this podcast. As you can tell, we do very little editing.
Make me sound good, please, Andrew. Make me sound good. Thank you.
In the comments. We have to do bright spots.
Do we? I was going to say that. I was like, do we? I mean, I think you probably nailed yours already, have you?
Yeah, it's the cave and the god of evolution and ponder and Red Cully in there.
Yeah, I like the Mad Max bit. I like kind of drunk Rincewind actually at the end a little bit as well. I was definitely feeling those vibes when I was reading that bit. That's was the right mindset with which to approach the end of the story. And I like Vergo Dibbler as well. So and I also just feel like it's worth saying, even though this is not by any measure a good Terry Pratchett book, a bad Terry Pratchett book is still better than like 95% of other books. Right.
Quite enjoyable. I've picked out my favorite quote.
Go on.
There's quite a few good quotes, let's be fair.
Yes, true. Yeah.
We put all our politicians in prison as soon as they're elected, don't you? Why? It saves time.
Yeah.
This one, but heck. Guilty pleasure.
Yeah. And it's a shame that doesn't go anywhere in particular. Like, it's not like an idiocracy kind of thing where the prime minister actually gets involved in the story or driving the plot or anything. But it's a very funny idea. And I guess like getting too into it, I do remember there were some vague political scandals in Australia around that time, and I'm sure this wasn't just like,
serious ones, yeah.
What I'm getting at is that it
up in prison.
Yeah, but yes. So I guess what I'm trying to point out is that it's a reference to that, and not just the broad cultural stereotype that all Australians are criminals. So it's clever. It is clever.
Do you have a favorite quote or a memory of one?
No, I've got it's not working. I'm gonna give I'll let you have the final say on the quotes on that one. I know it's gonna make your brain itchy that we've broken the format. But yeah, definitely lots in there that I did like. I think the thing that always makes my brain itchy about a story when it's not working for me is that if I find it really hard to identify what the theme of it is, then I know that I'm not going to have a satisfying experience. Like I don't know on the thematic level what this book is about in the way that I know that Jingo is about the futility of war, and it's about how people in how war only benefits those in power. Like that's got a proper theme, like a socio-political theme. Um, could pick other examples, but I don't know what the theme of this book is. I don't know what it's about.
Well, I've still got another 19 Discworld books and a load of short stories, animations, and comics to get through. I have no idea what book number 23 is in this sequence. Can you recall offhand?
Nah, but let's just get the old publication order up. I suppose we should. Discworld publication order. I don't know why I don't just keep it up
This is a whole
every
team.
time because we always need to look at it. So you were correct that this was book number 22. And but do you want to know what book number 23 is? Like how
Let's
strict
give
are you
us
still
a
bit?
wee spoiler by name.
Carpe jugulum?
Oh, I've got hopes for this.
Yeah.
This is going to be good.
I'll try to refrain from coloring your perception this time. I'll let you go in completely blank. And hopefully you listeners are preparing to jump back into that if you want to read along with us, or if you've got fond memories or not so fond memories of that book, you'll join us next time to hear us natter away about that one.
Let's do a few plugs for other stuff. So on our Blue Sky account, there should be a link up to the Devil's Own, which is a fantastic radio documentary that PJ wrote and produced, looking into the Satanic Panic in Northern Ireland.
I should point out that I didn't write it. John wrote it, but I produced it.
Right. But you were the researcher guy, so there's so much of your content in there.
I made it happen. Yeah, I appreciate you putting up that link. Yeah, so that's up there, and there's still a link to Country Rogues, my short comedy film with Owen Cleland, James Martin, up on BBC iPlayer for those in the UK who can check that out. Should be up for another little while. If you like country music.
My novel Coastlines After Dark is out now. It's a fantastic little bedtime short story collection for you, which will probably have you wetting the bed with laughter. And another time, the novel I edited with Holly Miles. Do check out my YouTube channel where I'm running 4 videos a week. No, 2 videos a week. It feels like 4 sometimes. 200 seconds, always sunny on Sunday, and longer form pieces on Wednesday. Lately, I've been doing a full 23-minute documentary about the making of The Night Man Cometh, where I'm really proud with how it's turned out. So if you like Sunny, get onto that. And there's also a comedy review of the Star Trek Section 31 film, which I think most of you have seen it, probably don't like it. But
I've
if you haven't seen,
never seen a film unite a fandom against it the way that this has. Like,
if you have seen it or haven't and don't even care about Star Trek, do come along and check out my comedy review, which I think caters to everyone. And yes, there's bitching in there, but it's mostly for the love of trying to make something beautiful out of something pants. I'll be doing reviews on Stephen Moffat and Co.'s Press Gang series over the next 6 weeks, and then moving into reviews on the new series of Doctor Who with a comic bent.
sounds good. Plenty of content out there for all to enjoy, and just makes me feel really unproductive. You know, I'll have to get something else cooking soon because I feel like I've been plugging the same 2 things forever. And surely eventually the BBC are going to take one, if not both, of my projects down, and I'll have nothing to show for myself anymore. So yeah, I need to get cooking. So on that note,
Thank you again to Andrew Wood. Thank you to our friends Ben and Elizabeth at the Pratt Chat podcast. Thank you to my top patrons, Arslan Hyder Ali, Art K over at Farset Labs, and particularly Ian Lawther, who also goes halfers on the Zoom bill, which allows us to do that. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Blue Sky at Discworld GNU. That's kind of our spot. Via the link, you can find all the places where you can listen to us on audio.
Indeed. So we have now I have now reread some Discworld. Andy has read one more Discworld, one down, 30. No, I can't count. One down, 17, 18 to go, something like that. Who's counting? Doesn't matter. No worries.
No worries, mate.
No worries, mate. All right. Until next time, thanks for stopping by.
Good day. Make it a beaut.
She'll be right. Oh, God. I tried to get through the whole pod without doing the accent. Right. Yes. Escape. Leave. Bye-bye.